All right, we might make a start because it's Marian and I, and it could go for a while, so getting started, let's go. So I am doing the introduction because unfortunately I have an apology from Caitlin Sutton, who is our curator, and also from Amanda Wojtowicz, who is the FOTA president. Neither of them are able to be here today due to various reasons. Amanda has prepared some words she's asked me to read, so I will get to those in a moment. But first, we need to do the acknowledgement. So Libraries Tasmania recognises the deep histories and cultures of the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. We acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional continuing custodians of the land, water and sky. We pay respects to the elders past and present who hold their memories, traditions, culture and knowledge of country, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose countries were never ceded. Okay, so these are the words from Amanda that she has asked me to, well, she asked Caitlin to do, and Caitlin's asked me to do. So, yes, so she did say that were she were a footballer, she would be out playing the next quarter. She's damaged herself, so swears to me she'll be okay. So now I'm Kate, and that's Marian, and our talk today is a joint effort on the Allports. And so we have these words from Amanda. So Kate V, that's me, has a scholarly record with several degrees and is an excellent researcher. This talk is part of a series on the Allports. I think it's number 4, it could be number 5, I'm not 100% sure. And Marian Jameson is a historian with an enviable record. Her most recent extraordinary book on Lily Allport is available in our merchandise store. And Marian is one of the most knowledgeable people on the Allports. The pair have both compelling and engaging speakers and are great fun to listen to. So she commends to you, myself, and Marian. Let's make a start. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Sorry, my voice is a bit, I've got asthma, so my voice is a bit every now and then. Okay. So my Waifs and Strays will come as no surprise to those of you who have heard my previous talks. I am, of course, going to be talking about the 3 surviving children of Curzon and Annie Allport. Hello. No, you're fine. I know that those of you who support my talks, and I thank you very much for that, are used to my talks being sagas, but this one is going to be more of a taster, little bite-sized snippets of the lives of Curzon and Annie's children. So the first one is Dudley Francis Curzon Allport. They do love a name. And he was born on Christmas Day in 1864 in Melbourne, Victoria. And he was born almost exactly 9 months to the day of his parents' marriage. Not that I'm suggesting anything untoward took place, of course. John Roberts, or Jack Allport, was born on the 18th of July 1867 in Melbourne. And he's named for John Roberts, who was the prominent Hoover lawyer and partner in the law firm Roberts and Allport, which he established with Curzon's father Joseph Allport and later his brother Morton. Sybil Annie, or Annie, well, she was born Annie Sybil Louise Allport, or simply Sybil, was born on the 13th of July 1876, also in Melbourne. So let's have a little look at the generations of the Allports. So I know a lot of you can't see, we do have a couple of copies of the family tree if you wanted to come and grab one. Sometimes they're a bit tricky to keep track of. But where's so the generation that Marian and I are going to be talking about today are this generation. So we have Joseph and Mary Morton, their children Morton, Mary Louise or Minnie, Curzon, and at the end there we have Everett. So Morton and Elizabeth Ritchie, that's their 6 kids. And then we have Curzon and his wife Annie. And they had 3 surviving children who are the ones we'll be talking about today. That's actually from Marian's book, so feel free to purchase that on your way out should you decide.
Honestly, that's outrageous.
I am nothing if not outrageous, Marian, you should know this. Okay, so Morton was to marry Elizabeth Ritchie, and they had 6 children who Marian will talk about. And Curzon married Annie Houston, and as we know, they had 3 surviving children. So there's Curzon and Annie. There they are. Poor old Annie. That's the only known photograph that we have of Annie in our collection. Mary Louise, or Minnie, married James Reed, who was an officer in the British Army based in India. And her brood will have to wait for another day because they've got some interesting stories too. And Evatt never had children, nor did he marry. But back to Dudley, Jack and Sybil. After their marriage in 1864, the new Mr. and Mrs. Curzon Allport removed themselves from Tasmania and settled in Melbourne, Victoria, where Curzon had established his own law firm. In 1879, after the death of his father Joseph and his brother Morton, Curzon and his family returned to Tasmania. Curzon, Dudley, who was around 14, Jack, who was around 12, moved in with the grief-stricken Mary Morton at the family home Aldridge Lodge in Hobart, while Annie and their youngest child, Sybil, who was about 3, was sent to live with her family in New Norfolk. So let's have a look at child number 1. He was the number 1 child in more than one ways. Dudley, or Dastardly Dudley, as I like to call him. Well, that's Curzon, who's just looking a bit evil. I always like to throw that photo in, just because. So there's Dudley. Now, there's a lot I can say about Dudley, but short of keeping you here for another hour, I will just give you the highlights or the lowlights, as it may be. And Dudley was educated at the Hutchins School, and once he was old enough, he followed his father Curzon, his grandfather Joseph, and his uncle Morton into the profession of law. Dudley was his father's constant companion, and they worked alongside each other, along with John Roberts and his cousin Cecil at Roberts and Allport. Now, before I go any further, I need to give you a little bit of a background so that you understand the context in which this talk took place. So, upon his return from Melbourne with his family in 1879, Curzon took over his recently deceased brother's place in the law firm alongside his nephew Cecil, who was Morton's son. Things ran relatively smoothly until Curzon caused a scandal by attempting to divorce his wife Annie in 1883. And this caused a rift between uncle and nephew, as Cecil was essentially forced out of the family firm and ultimately established the new firm, Dobson Mitchell and Allport, which is still in existence today. This split caused tensions between the cousins, especially between Cecil and Dudley, who was, as I said, his father's right-hand man. So there they are together. Always my pledge. So we have, there's Curzon there, and that's Dastardly Dudley. So this is on the grounds of the family home, Aldridge Lodge, which is in Balbone Street now.
What are they all doing?
They're not on crutches, they're part of the Photography Society.
Oh, right.
I know, you'd think they had like a mass accident, but no, that's their cameras. There they are. Where's my old mate with his fan hanging out? He's up there having a lovely time. There he is. I don't know, I don't think I'd like to come across any of those in a day, but anyway. Ooh. So tensions between the family members escalated after the death of the matriarch, Mary Morton Allport, in 1895, when her will became a source of contention. So in a nutshell, Curzon had been able to manipulate his mother to leave almost everything to himself, his children, Dudley and Jack. Interestingly, though Sybil was admitted in favour of her cousin Russell, his brother Evatt, who was also a victim of Curzon's machinations, and the children of his deceased sister Minnie. Morton's children, including Cecil, were left almost nothing. In a letter to his mother Elizabeth, dated the 11th of June 1895, Cecil sums up what his feelings are towards his uncle and cousin following Mary Morton's death. I despise Curzon and his children for the way everything has been worked for themselves. Granny always thought she was very poor. It now turns out that she had accumulated about £2,200 of money, and I very much doubt whether she ever knew it. It seems much more probable that those who knew the contents of her will gave her as little income as they could and accumulated the rest, knowing it must come to them before long. That's just a cropped picture of Dudley from that photograph. He's looking great. The dark eyes there. On the 3rd of August of the same year, Cecil again wrote to his mother, saying, Dudley, I am sorry to say, has proved since Granny's death that he is a greater rogue as his father. In fact, the only difference between them is that he has the disadvantage of also being a fool. That's my favourite, I love it. So there's no hiding the contempt that Cecil felt for his cousin. In the following years, since Mary Morton's will was settled, with Dudley, Curzon and an easily manipulated Evatt gaining control of Aldridge Lodge, amongst other things, Cecil gives an update on what he called the Curzon crew. So Dudley's engaged to some girl in Melbourne and will live in the old family home, being Aldrich Lodge. Sybil will live with them. Curzon will do ditto, having his little cottage as a present. So Curzon took up residence in the gardener's cottage, which was on the grounds of the family's lodge where he installed his lady friend. And later, Sybil, it is said, is going into some hospital in Melbourne as a nurse. And when Uncle Everett is discarded, Dudley, I suppose, will get married and occupy Everett's home rent-free. Curzon continuing on in the cottage. They are a most despicable crowd. Curzon Allport died on September 1899, leaving Dudley the only Allport left in the old family firm, and possibly to his own devices for the first time in his life. So let's pick up on Dudley's story and see what he got up to now that he was free of his father's influence. An article printed in the Daily Telegraph, Launceston, on the 2nd of January 1900 reports that Dudley Allport, brother of Cecil Allport, returned to Hobart from Johannesburg, escaping the Boer War by refugee train. The reports claim that he had been living in Johannesburg for almost 5 years. An interesting and completely out of character turn of events for a man who was so entrenched in the family firm and also society of Hobart. So according to the papers of the day, he was very much involved in the local theatre and in choir performances, and was apparently fairly good in the Theatre Royal's 1897 production of HMA's Pinafore. As it turns out, the paper got it wrong, and the story was corrected on the 9th of January 1900, stating that Dudley had never been in Johannesburg and that he was the cousin of Cecil Allport, not his brother, a point I'm sure Cecil took great pains to have publicly corrected. I do not know what happened to the Melbourne fiancé of 1895-96, referenced by Cecil, but after 2 unsuccessful attempts at finding a wife, so his first fiancée, Emily Helena Hannaford, she died in March 1890. So Dudley finally marries a Miss Marian Louise Hedberg. Oh, there we go. So that's the note of their marriage that's in the Bible that we have in our Allport collection. And she lists all the people at the wedding. So Sybil was there, his mother was not. So a little event going on there. That's their marriage certificate. And that is supposedly Dudley and Marian. I'm not seeing any likeness to Dudley, but I do not know what Marian looked like. So it may well have been a very good likeness of her. I do not know. That was 1902. Their only child, Joan Everett Allport, was born 8 months after the wedding and was apparently a premature birth. So there she writes, on September the 18th, 1902, at Aldrich Lodge, Elbowden Street, was born Joan Everett Allport prematurely, daughter of Dudley and Marian Allport. Just in case we needed to know. But family life for Dudley and Marian Louisa was very short-lived when Dudley suddenly died 4 years later in September 1906 at his home in Aldrich Lodge after being seized by a fit. There's a little note down there that she's got. Dudley Francis Curzon, the dearly loved husband of Marian Allport, died at 8 p.m. after a few hours' illness. He was interred at Sandy Bay in the same grave as Miss Hannaford. Right. So this was what was written in the paper. The death of Mr. Dudley Allport, which occurred very suddenly yesterday, had come as a shock to his friends. The deceased, who was but 44 years of age, was a charming companion and a genial gentleman. He inherited all the good qualities of the Allport family and will be missed among those who delighted in his companionship. Mr. Allport married Miss Hedberg, sister of the Superintendent Hedberg, who survives him. He was at one time a member of the firm Roberts and Allport, but had retired from the partnership sometime prior to his death. Given what we know of Dudley from Cecil's letters, the author of this obituary, published in the Launceston Examiner, must not have sought the opinion of his cousins when writing this. But perhaps I'm being too harsh to poor old Dudley. He may have had a good side after all. Dudley was buried with his former fiancée, which which I still find strange, Miss Hannaford at Queenborough, and he was later moved to Cornelia Bay. So the inscription on their grave reads, "In loving memory of Emily Helena Hannaford, who died on the 10th of March 1890, aged 25, and also Dudley Francis Curzon Allport, who died on the 7th of September 1906, aged 43. Having died without a will, all his possessions, lands, debts, and effects, including Aldridge Lodge, which he had inherited from his father and his uncle Everett, who had died in 1902, went to his widow, Marian Louisa. Upon his death, Marian Louisa, their daughter Joan, and sister Sybil, were joined at the family home, Aldridge Lodge, by Dudley, Jack, and Sybil's mother, Annie Allport, who had until this point been essentially living in exile in New Norfolk. Annie remained with her daughter, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter until her death in 1819. Marian Louise, 1918. What did I say?
1819.
Of course I did. 1919. She did not go back in time. She was not a person in the past. Apologies. Marian Louisa would die in 1941 and left her effects, again including Aldridge Lodge, to her daughter Joan Everett Allport. Some of you have asked me about the relationship between Joan Everett Allport and a Flora MacDonald. I don't know if any of you are here to know. Okay, anyway. She was left in charge of Joan should her mother die before she reached her age. But anyway. It is here that we say goodbye to Dudley and we move on to his siblings. In comparison to Dudley, not much is known about Jack and Sybil. They are both somewhat of an enigma, but let's have a look at what we do know. Jack, and I don't have any confirmed images of him, unlike his brother who went to Hutchins, he attended the Horton College in Ross. In April 1888, the 21-year-old John Roberts Allport Esquire arrived in Melbourne on board the Scindia from Calcutta in India. I have no idea what he was doing there, but he may have been visiting his cousins who resided there. So the children of his late aunt, Minnie Reid, her children spent time obviously in India as well as in England and here in Tasmania. In August of that year, Jack was working as an articled clerk with his father's partner, Frederick Lodge at Robertson Allport, and by 1895 was qualified to practice law in Hobart. So that's his articles of clerkship. And there are his papers to say that he can practice law. Interestingly, in March of 1890, it was reported in the Examiner that Jack, son of Curzon Allport, had been admitted to hospital for typhoid, which he allegedly contracted drinking contaminated milk. Now, it must have been a very slow news day that day, as there wasn't even a note warning people to avoid said milk, and I am not entirely sure why it warranted publication as news. But as was with the Allports at that time, it appeared that anything about them was worth reporting. Jack recovered and he married a Clarissa Baines in April in Melbourne in 1895, and his cousin Cecil, writing to his mother again about the event, says, "Jack has distinguished himself by marrying a barmaid from the West Coast and leaving this colony for South Africa. I understand he had taken his wife with him. I thought one of them would bust before long." Yeah, so I believe this part is kind of in relation to the fact that there was all this drama around the will and all this thing was happening, and Dudley and Jack kind of got swept up in it. Well, Dudley was front and centre, but Jack and poor Uncle Everett got caught up in the whole machinations of it, and eventually, one of them was going to escape, which happened to be Jack. So those of you that are curious to know exactly what happened with Curzon and Dudley and the will and the divorce and all of that, I do have some talks that are available for you to listen to, shameless plug. My favourite one and the best one is only available on Allport, but the others are available on YouTube, well, the Libraries Tasmania pages. It seems that while Dudley remained standing front and centre with their father, Jack chose to flee to the furthest end of the empire to start a new life with his wife. Jack and Clarissa left for Johannesburg in October 1896, where Jack practiced law in the Cape Colony. In March 1900, he was back home and gave a lecture to the full house of the Australian Natives Association, about his experience in the Transvaal region of South Africa, so that's around where Johannesburg is now. He spoke in rapture about Johannesburg, a city finer than Melbourne or Sydney, with shops ranked next to those in Paris, a number of elegantly dressed ladies and men who were very sharp. He stated that English was the most spoken language, although Dutch was the official language of the courts and the police ruled the city. Of course, at that time, the spectre of the Boer War hung heavily over the city, and Jack fled Johannesburg just as the war was being declared. He describes his escape as follows. One official was selling tickets at 10,000 people who were leaving by train. The passengers were packed as close as possible in coal trucks. The Boers were at the stations where the train stopped, and no one was allowed to leave the train. If one did, one found a rifle presented at one. Sometimes shots were fired over the train. The passengers were taken to the Natal border. Is this ringing any bells? This little bit here? Yeah? Yeah, it turns out that the article and subsequent correction published in relation to Dudley's escape from Johannesburg some months prior was actually the story of Jack. Despite his fleeing the colony and returning to Hobart, he would not be the last Jack would see of South Africa. Would not be the last he would see of South Africa. In April 1901, once war was officially declared, he enlisted in the newly formed British Cape Colony Cyclist Corps. He was listed as being 35 years of age and married. His occupation was that of a barrister. He stood 5 foot 9.5 inches and he weighed 161 pounds. His hair was light brown and his eyes are bluish grey. His wife was listed as next of kin and she resided in a hotel in Durban. Sadly, Jack was to die many months later on the 28th of June 1901, and not on the battlefield as first thought, but of diphtheria in the Wynberg Military Hospital. His wife Clarissa had him buried and erected a headstone to his memory at St John's Cemetery in Wynberg. Can you read the inscription? Just says, in loving memory of John Roberts, Allport, late of Hobart, Tasmania, who died in the military hospital at Wynberg on the 28th of July 1901, aged 36, erected by his sorrowful wife. His brother Dudley was informed of his death by cable and a notice was placed in the local papers. The many friends in Hobart of Mr. J.R. Allport will regret to hear of his death. His brother, Mr. Dudley Allport, received a cable from the Cape yesterday conveying the sad intelligence. Mr. Allport joined the Cape Colony Cycle Corps, which has been operating against the rebels, and the deceased was a man of much brilliancy and universally respected by a great number of his friends in Hobart and other parts of the state, who will hear of his death with deep regret. He was 34 years of age and a fine fellow, both physically and morally. Unlike his father. On his death, his estranged cousin Cecil writes once again to his mother, I saw by telegram in the paper recently that Jack Allport had died in South Africa. I understood the news was sent here by a cable from South Africa, but there are no particulars beyond the announcement of his death. He was here some time ago, as I may have mentioned to you at the time, with his wife, but I never saw anything of him. She was a bad lot. I believe a dreadful drunkard. A man who was in South Africa some time ago had seen her there and told me she was a barmaid in a public house before Jack married her. Never one for holding back his opinion, that Cecil. Intriguingly, as a side note, the 1903 and 1904 Hobart Town Gazettes list the then deceased John R. Roberts as being on Flinders Island, in which he apparently was the owner of some land and it was care of Roberts and Allport. I just assume this is a simple carryover from his previous entries, but I'm going to look some more into it. And so this abbreviated story of Jack ends, and I do not know what became of Clarissa. She may have dropped off the face of the earth. I can only presume she inherited all of Jack's assets and went on to live a happy life, or if Cecil's information is correct, drank it all away and died in a gutter. Who knows? Now let's move on to our last sibling, Sybil. There she is. So this is by Lily. And it is the only confirmed image that we know of Sybil, although I'm sure there are some hiding in the family albums, but we just haven't been able to identify them. So Lily was obviously her cousin. She was the sister of Cecil. So she was born Annie Sybil Louise, but known as Sybil, and she was the last child and only surviving daughter of Curzon and Annie Allport. And with a 10+ year age gap between herself and her older brothers, Sybil spent much of her childhood with her mother Annie in New Norfolk. And I'll just put that here because it's a particularly cute little note that she wrote to Mary Morton for her birthday. I think it's not dated, but I think Sybil probably was about 7 or so when she wrote it. It says, "Dear Granny, many happy returns of the day. I send you my love and 8 kisses and a card which I think very pretty. I was not very well yesterday and did not go to school. How is Auntie?" So Auntie is Mary Morton's niece who came out from England and spent some time with her as her companion. She was known as Auntie or Aunt Sarah. "How is Auntie? Give her my love. We have got a cuckoo clock. A kiss for Papa and Dudley. Your loving grandchild, Sybil Allport." And then there's just a little note from Annie at the bottom that says, "Dear Granny, much love and many happy returns of your birthday, Annie." Just thought it was cute. As a result of staying in New Norfolk, Sybil was essentially separated from the family drama which engulfed her siblings, especially her oldest brother Dudley, meaning we do not have a lot of information on her, as Cecil, who is our best, if somewhat biased, contemporary source for the family, did not have much reason to write about her. What he did write is that by the close of the 19th century, Sybil was in Melbourne where she was studying to be a nurse. I cannot find any record of her time there, but I imagine it was only because she was there for a short while, as by 1900 Sybil was back in Hobart working at the Hobart Hospital and placed a notice in the Mercury on the 28th of July 1900 advising that she had lost her keys and would like them returned to Nurse Allport at the hospital. In January 1901, she was granted a few days' rest and received her certificate of proficiency in July of that same year. However, by August, she had resigned her position. The committee has to report that Nurse Allport has tendered her resignation, which was accepted with much regret at the loss of her valuable service. From here, Sybil went into private nursing and in 1919 was living in Fisher Avenue and working as a nurse to members of Tom Steele's family. So Tom Steele was married to Sybil's cousin, Cecil's sister, Minnie, and that's another Minnie, but she was Mary Marguerite Minnie, who had died a few years prior in 1912. Tom Steele died that same year in 1919, and he left bequests to, among others, Cecil, Cecil's siblings, and Sybil. Sybil's share included a trust of £250. Thank you, Kate. I look at this as a sign of saying that the thawing relations between the cousins may well be starting. Sybil never married, and when she wasn't engaged as a live-in nurse, she lived with the Allport family, Aldridge Lodge, with various members of the family, including her brother Dudley, mother Annie, sister-in-law Marian Louisa, and niece Joan. Tragedy would befall Sybil on the 5th of May 1945 when she was crossing Elizabeth Street near Burnett Street and she was struck and killed by a car. Sybil was 69 years old. The inquest into her death found the driver had feloniously killed the deceased and he was committed to trial on a charge of manslaughter. I have not been able to find if he actually stood trial or not. Sybil was buried in a private ceremony. Sybil's death notice left her niece Jo as the only survivor of Curzon Allport's line, a line that has since died out. And perhaps fittingly, given all the heartache Curzon called his family, it would be Morton's children and grandchildren who would carry the Allport legacy into today. And with that, I hand over to Marian for her work, Waifs and Strays.
Can I ask you a question?
You can ask me a question. If I can get my brain to work, we might be able to answer
Do
it.
you think they were?
What? Waifs and Strays?
Who was a waif, who was a stray?
I think they were both stray. I think they were all strays because they all tend to stray away from the poor Allport family. I like to think of Morton and the Henry. And
You're not biased at all.
I'm not at all biased. No, you will never find me. I have a slight weird obsession with old Curzon and what he got up to. He was a naughty, naughty man. But yes, no, I think they were all a wee bit straying away from, you know, what the family came here to do and what happened. It all turned into a bit of a disaster for that lot. Well, but even the law could save them, Marian.
On that note,
There's your water.
I've given lots of talks in this position. I talked about, well, the first year I came, I talked about Marian and Allport, the Ionians. Then on Joseph, I sort of started at the top and went downwards. Joseph and his possessions, some of the legal possessions are on display now, finally. A long time. He's got his wig in that room there, room 3. And then I did Morton Allport and his possessions and his career, including one on his guns, which unnerved some people, but there were a lot of very interested men who watched Julie Carjar take the thing to bits and put it together again. And then Tony wrote an article on Morton Allport the Younger. Yeah, I did the research. and I well, you did a lot of research on the plane, but
no, I did it here.
it's in the Stra papers. He was the one who went off to war so he could do something, which was interesting. And very many on Lily Allport, which I won't go any further about. I'm glad Kate introduced it that way she did, because I don't have to read the first page very much. But I'm left with I'm talking today about the 6 children of Morton and Elizabeth Allport. They're the 3rd generation of Allports in Tasmania. And there they are. Middle one?
Yeah, I think so. Hang on.
Oh, it doesn't work, does it?
Oh, that's not
Okay. Okay.
that one.
Okay. They first lived in Labrine. You'll have to forgive me. I'm suffering from long COVID and my memory is going.
Fair enough.
Burnley in Davey Street until 1874. And then they moved to Labrina, which Morton had built specially. In the beginning of my book, I've included a letter on Morton holding forth on his house. And it was obviously very dear to him, but he only enjoyed it for 4 years before he died prematurely. Both houses still exist, which is the lovely thing about Hobart, in Davey Street, and I believe they're in very good hands, both. I'll summarise the 6 children, and then I'll talk about 2 of them in particular. First one, Mary Marguerite, Minnie.
Oh, sorry, I'll just find it. Got the E on steel.
Not much is known about her early life. She tended to stay in the background, but she married Tom Steele in December 1881, and he was a catch.
He was a cat.
Lived most of her life at Southernfield near Bothwell. She and her husband travelled to Britain and Europe. She lived the late Victorian life. In fact, the whole family seemed to go backwards and forwards to England and Tasmania with great ease. I mean, you'd think they were going to Sydney, but they just hopped on a ship and went whenever they liked. She and her husband gave advice to all the others. Minnie was full of advice. And I must admit, Cecil consulted Tom Steele. Tom Steele was fairly rich. His inheritance was rich. And Cecil consulted him about money or family crises, and there were enough to deal with. So he needed all the advice he could get. They were well off, yeah. Tom sold Southern Field in 1902 and the couple moved into town. Mary Marguerite died in 1912 and Thomas Field succumbed to the flu epidemic after the war in 1919. He went very quickly, much to Cecil's dismay. Here he is. He was deeply touched by his father's death, as he said. Within one day, he lost him. He was the obvious successor to his father's place in the legal practice, which didn't necessarily work out, as Kate has said. But at this point, I must add that most of what we know about these 6 people is because of Cecil. He was very responsible and worthy. And those 2 words just came up. And he had this habit of writing to his mother every Friday night without fail. And it was only sickness that stopped him. And those letters are so valuable. They are so valuable. I had to check on one. And when you turn the page, sometimes a piece of letter falls off. Yeah. They're very, very fragile. But they are enormously valuable. Our view of the family, these 6 people, is totally shaped by Cecil. And if you disagree with anything I might say today, let's blame Cecil. Blame Cecil. She's already. But Cecil's life was ruined in 1884 when his engagement to Georgie Fawns, which is a Launceston family, was broken by his fiance's mother, who Cecil was convinced was put off by the family scandal with Curzon.
Oh, Joe Curzon.
He comes up, but Cecil Curzon. Cecil was bereft. At the age of 26, he wrote to Mr. Fawns. And he says, "From the day I asked your dear daughter to be my wife, I gave up everything for her sake and honestly strove to be everything she would wish me to be. I have never been fast or dissipated." The thought is absolutely shocking. And he puts it in a letter. But for 10 months gave up going to theatres and operas because she did not like it, which is sad in itself. I took a self-imposed temperance pledge to please her and went to church twice every Sunday because she thought it right. Now, I think her father was a vicar, so maybe she had a religious upbringing, but he did try. "Forgive my writing like this. My darling was all the world to me and she is so still. Yet I do not want her if she cannot be happy with me. It is better for one to be wretched than," and somebody's transcribed this wrongly, "two." Got it, yes. One is better than 2. But amongst them they have caused a wound in my heart, which is not scarred over yet, and the mark of which it will take a lifetime to obliterate. He's only 26. You've got to keep that in mind. You make all things bright. You may make all things bright again, perhaps. I was told the other day the dear girl was engaged to someone else. This surely cannot be true. I cannot think she would go so far for even her mother. He was definitely anti her mother. Yeah. May God watch over her and keep her. And this is the final thing that got me. If she is happy, I can live. And I think that influenced the whole of Cecil's life. From then on, he just worked and worked and worked in the legal practice, making money to sort of support his own family. And apparently most of his siblings on the other side of the world. More of that later. Cecil was the outsider, even though, or perhaps because, and this is a quote from Lily, he managed their money as well as doing his normal job. He wrote to his mother and he tried to manage their lives. But he found joy in his own children, although he was devastated by the death of Morton. Morton was his favourite son, everybody has to admit. He had a long career in the legal firm and also had a good reputation as an historian. And he created the beginnings of the Allport Library, and those two books in the middle of that shelf are the beginnings. Tony knows about those two books. They're the Cook Voyages. He was so proud of what he'd had. So you won't blame Cecil, he was scarred for life. I can't blame him anymore. I used to, but I can't. Third born was Lily, 1860. Well, we know lots about her.
We do. We have a book on it. Buy the book. Make a great Christmas present.
Lily was, before 1888, was looking after her mother in the house, the big house, with her sister, who was still at school. And Cecil wrote about it. She has no servant to help her, and Lily is as unhappy there as possible. She sees no one, and except on the rare occasions when I can take her out, she has no pleasure at all. This is Cecil being compassionate. Lily is at an age when she is at her best. And if she is ever to marry, she should before very many more years are over her head. Now, he's talking about her. She's born in 1860. She's 28 at this stage. I don't want her married, far from it, nor would she wish to change her life in this respect. But as the mother lives, she, Lily, has, to put it bluntly, no chance, and besides, her life is, I know, a most unenviable one. But Lily was plotting. Her mother wanted to go back to England, and Lily, of course, said, I'll take you. She had other plans. But as soon as they got there, Lily virtually ran away. And this is in Cecil's opinion. She had her plans, she ran away, she left her mother's accommodation and set up herself. And from then on, she was away. She left her mother and sister and dived into the London art world. But in 1891, she was exhibited at the Royal Academy for the first time, all of 17 times altogether. And all of a sudden, Cecil was writing very proudly about Lily and her success at the Royal Academy. And I'm sure that the people of Hobart heard about it endlessly. She remained in England until 1922, having exhibited more at the Royal Academy. She travelled in Europe. And in 1908, she became a teacher at the elementary drawing for 16 years at the London School of Photo Engraving and Lithography. Now, that was a huge achievement. She was the only female teacher. I can't find out how much she or the other teachers were paid for comparison. She returned to Tasmania in 1922. I think it was to see Cecil, who was ill, and her mother was ill, but they were both dead by 1926, and she was off again. Cecil left her some money, but being Cecil, he left her it invested, and she only lived on the interest. And if she died, it was to go back into the pool. Cecil made sure that she couldn't swan off them. But she did. She returned to England in 1927 and studied again at the Grosvenor School of Model Art and returned to Hobart in 1932, only to open her own studio and a business in 1935 and sell Christmas calendars. And you've got to read the book for what's in between, because, you know, there are plenty left. And they're all in storage at Rugby. Okay, I said I'd go through quickly, didn't I? Fourth was Evatt Gordon, Allport. The name Evatt comes up a lot.
Family name.
Born in 1863. I have this theory that earlier in the year, in January, Morton and Elizabeth went to Lake St Clair. And I think he's the result of their holiday.
No.
Because he was born in November 1863. He went to Horton College and he was the gold medalist in 1880 when he took his Associate of Arts degree, which is on display in that display case back there. It's a tiny little gold medal, but it was worth a lot at Horton College. He also gained first prizes in that year for, wait for it, Latin, Greek and mathematics. Second prizes for English, Italian and a prize for geology. So almost a clean sweep. He also won a minor scholarship to complete his schooling for 2 years. It was worth £40, but I don't know what the current equivalent would be. In 1883, he won the Tasmanian Scholarship, which entitled him to a course at one of British universities. And I'll talk more about him later. He's one of the ones I want to concentrate on. Because it took him a long while to make up his mind what he actually did. For that reason, he's maybe strayed. So he's sort of half astray. After several changes of career, that's how I summarise it, he married Alice Mary Hale in Launceston in 1905, and he died in Launceston in 1934. More about Gordon, and I better hurry up and do it. Russell, James Russell Allport, 1869. I suspect there might have been another child in between, but I can't find, between 63 and 69, but I can't find any evidence. He was born in 1869. And I believe, reading all those letters by Cecil and admitting that there was a bias, but I still come through that Russell was the spoilt member of the family. There's not much I know about his early life, and I'll talk more about that later, why I think he's spoiled. He was enrolled at Hudson School at the end of January 1879, just after his 10th birthday. After he finished his education, he worked for a time in Tasmania, then went to England for an experience as an engineer. Returned to Tasmania in 1893 and finally set up his own business. This is the only portrait of Russell I can find. And believe me, I have looked everywhere. This is his ticket for the Tasmanian exhibition in 1894-95. All the rest of the photos I find are all taken at a distance. He doesn't appear by himself, except with a tree. In groups, he obviously feels uncomfortable. He's not comfortable in that photo either. You can tell by his eyes.
Yeah.
He's either in front of a tree or a piece of machinery. He died in a Fijian hospital of a heart attack in 1914. So that's at an age of, I think he was about 35. No, Anyway, do the math. Okay, one more. Eva Mary Allport, sometimes known as May. Cecil refers to her as May a lot. She was only 6 when her father, Morton, died. She was born in 1872. Perhaps because she was only 6, she took a keener interest in her father's life. She managed to save and transcribe some of his papers and diaries. Without those, we'd be lost. And she also took care of his photographs that were in her custody. Now, she's the reliable one. But she looked after their mother from the time of 1888, when they went to England, to her mother's death in 1926. Sorry. Her mother left most of her possessions to Eva Mary in her will. Even the little cottage down at Browns River, which I have yet to locate, because they've all changed down at Browns River, which Lily used to use a lot. So, in a way, I feel sorry for Eva Mary, but they all expected her to look after her mother. I mean, Cecil wrote, she's the one who had to do it. It was a bit unfair. Okay. Back to Gordon. Back to Gordon. Okay. No. We left Gordon receiving the Tasmanian Scholarship. This was really an outstanding achievement. He was very bright. I've got here the papers of the Tasmanian Scholarship exam. I'll read one out, which, I mean, the whole paper. I've got copies there, you can look at them if you like. And they're online, so you can just read. But the papers are extraordinary. I would never have been able to answer any of them at school, and much less university. I wouldn't have a chance. English. From synthetic, I don't know what that means. Aryan languages have generally tended to become analytic. Explain this statement and contrast the advantages which a language possesses in the former and in the latter stage. I can't even understand the question. But I mean, this is, you know, he went to Horton College. And then they quote poetry. What older languages have been the chief sources of modern English? Explain when and how they contributed, and what is the special value of each? And at this stage, he's 19. So I don't know what you were doing at 19, but I wasn't answering those questions. So he was clever. Gordon chose to go to Cambridge. I don't know if they knew anybody there, but he was in Christ College and he went to Cambridge in 1884. And someone there wrote that he had a brilliant career in mathematical subjects. So he was a maths person. And I like that praise. I've got this in capitals, but all was not well. Cecil writes to his mother, urge Gordon to push on and pass his exams and be called to the bar without losing a day. It may make all the difference to his whole future, whether he is here soon or not. Try and make him understand this. There is a splendid opening here now. Mr. Waterhouse is going to Launceston as police magistrate, and there is ample room for a steady, hard-working and rising young man. And then he writes to Gordon, do not by any reason of any ideas which you think honourable, throw away the chance which must affect most vitally your whole life, unless you are thoroughly satisfied you are doing what is right. There is nothing like a profession, and a call to the English bar will enable you to practice in any British court throughout the globe. Wait for it. I could lend you the money to finish your course, but it will be far better for you afterwards if you go on as you've begun. I want to see you bear and suffer a little and come out of it right side up. You write as if I'd worked my way along a bed of roses. Perhaps you may know the truth someday. Cecil is fed up. Then he writes to his mother, you should not pay Gordon's passage out here. Gordon wants to come back. I think it is in fact useless his coming. He would get nothing to do, and he would, in a short time, bitterly regret he had made the change. I also felt your going was a mistake. This is to his mother, Lily. And thought Lily would upset Gordon a good deal, but none of this us thought his whole future would be jeopardized in this way. He seemed to think I had a very easy time of it. Poor boy, he doesn't know what the world is to be out in and depend on yourself alone. This is Cecil being sad. Cecil writes that he's convinced, this is to his mother, you will do right to refuse to pay Gordon's passage back here. She's already laid out a considerable sum of money for his benefit. He can do no good here. For myself, I will not lend him a shilling to assist in throwing away his golden opportunities. Gordon wanted to give up his course and come home. He did come back and he took a job at Horton College as an assistant teacher. And that didn't last very long. He debated about his finishing his legal studies. Cecil writes, Gordon came down last week from Horton College and spoke of leaving to finish his legal studies. So he's changed his mind. He has some, this is Cecil again, he has some singular ideas about work and told me quite seriously that he would not work at all unless he was obliged and would never work more than necessary. Sounds a bit like some, oh, well, one of my grandchildren anyway. He did return to England. He was called to the bar of the Middle Temple. He finished his studies and he came back in 1893. There's more of his diplomas.
Yeah, that was my fault. We missed that from
and that's a call to the Inner Temple. The Inner Temple, of course, centre of the British legal.
Can you see that? Sorry, it's a light shining.
That accompanies a whole series of developments. Paintings of me. On the 18th of November, Cecil wrote, Dear Mother, Gordon was playing chess with Tom and lost feeling in his arm and leg and then was violently sick. Steele sent for a doctor and telegraphed to Cecil and Russell that would come at once. The doctor said he was not in any danger but believed the seizure was cataleptic and suspected that a blood clot from the heart was pressing on a nerve. Gordon had had a stroke, and that is in 1894. Very, very young. In February 85, Cecil wrote he was sure Gordon would never work again. But by September, he was considering Gordon going to Melbourne or England to become a doctor. Obviously, he was quite clever, but he just sort of mucked around a bit. He studied at Melbourne University and then revisited England, where in 1901 he became a member of the Royal College of Surgeons. His diploma is in that display case. The diplomas are all in a row. Great, huge thing. He became a licentiate of the Royal College of Physicians in the following year, and in 1904 received the Diploma of Public Health. He spent time at Guy's Hospital, London, and was in private practice for a short time in London, but then he comes back to Tasmania. It's the call back to Tasmania. We all have it. He practiced at Launceston, Dover, and Sorel, and in 1922 he was appointed Chief House Surgeon at the Hobart Public Hospital. He lived in Sandy Bay and gave Lily a home there with his wife when she returned in 1922. But he still had impaired physique, as they call it. He found it difficult to cope with the demands of hospital work, and he decided to retire and get a less exacting practice. He was a well-loved GP there when he retired to Amita, Flinders Island. How do you say that? Anybody know? Amita would be. And I'd like to thank the Furno Museum in Flinders for that photo. He worked until he died. He was taken to Launceston and he died in hospital. So his early academic promise, showed by Gordon, was fulfilled abroad and at home, but notwithstanding anything that Cecil had said about him. He was no waif at all. He was clever, but he strayed a bit at first, and then finally everything came together. I'm sorry, I should finish it, but I've only got 5 minutes left. Oh, I keep doing that. Apologies. This is Russell again, and his eyes, and he doesn't like having his photo taken. Cecil gives an opinion on Russell. Russell is worth 100 of him, in brackets, Gordon. He would never stoop to ask anyone for a shilling. And the consequence is that if he ever wants assistance, he will get it, as everyone is confident he will do what is honourable and repay. I've always thought that Russell had the greatest claim, this is his writing to his mother, on your purse, and I still think so. Obviously a favourite. What did I say about spoiled? And when you come back and he is older, perhaps something may be done to starting him at a more remunerative business. He will make good use of what is done for him and not fritter everything away. When he left school, Russell gained experience in Tasmania at Mount Cameron, and then at the Longreach Dredging and Tin Mining Company. And it was 1889. He was getting restless. He wanted to buy some land, and Cecil disapproved. So Cecil was, he had trouble with shares he owned. He'd been involved in a family court case. He brought a case against his uncle Henry. Now that's keeping in the family. But then he wanted to go to England to join his mother and sisters and perhaps study engineering. Cecil writes to his mother again after receiving that news. I know what you say about living in Glasgow. So somewhere there's a letter that says he was going to study engineering in Glasgow. Will this be likely to suit you, do you think? This is Cecil being diplomatic, and he's so clumsy. The term of service which Russell would have to go through would probably extend over several years, and I expect you would find it irksome to be in one place. There's nothing about Glasgow apart from then on. Glasgow has no recollection, so I think Cecil won that one. He's also worried about Russell settling into some employment and considers him thoroughly good and kind-hearted and most unselfish and honourable. He caught the steamer in February 1890. But he caught the Arroya. Russell seems confident about his success in engineering. In brackets, I've put, Cecil paid the £100 fare himself. When he got to England, he became an apprentice with Spagnoletti and Crooks. The Mercury wrote an article in 1899 which gave his employment history, which was interesting. He gained a thorough knowledge of the profession of engineer. But was he qualified? Only as an apprentice, I think. I can't prove it. Not like all the diplomas that this bloody Gordon got. He went to work on the City and South London Railway, which they were building. And then he went to work in the Notting Hill Electric Light Station. Got valuable experience. Russell seems obsessed with money. 1892, Mother feels Lily influenced Russell to ask for more money. Cecil writes that Russell needs more assistance than the rest of them, as he missed out on the educational advantages in his younger years and merits more consideration now. I can't understand this sort of blind admiration. Cecil speaks about paying another premium, £300 to £500 to Russell, and feels it would be injudicious to give him a lump sum. Cecil's spoiling him, but he seems cautious about Russell's money sense. And right. Russell returned in August 1893 and was fortunate to find employment with the Hobart Electric Tramway Company as an assistant engineer. So he got his qualifications virtually through the experience in England, and it was probably the very best he could get. So he walked into this job at the tramway company. The tram tracks were laid while he was away, but he was still dissatisfied. Cecil reports that Russell still wants to be paid his allowance from his mother, even though he's working for the tram company. Yeah, mind you, the allowance was £125 a year and Lily received 60. The boys got 125. Lily received 60. He also complained in 1893 that he was unsatisfied with the work at the tramway because he's getting paid less than he would if he was in England. Now he's just spoiled. But he got money from somewhere. He set up his own business in 1895, first in Murray Street, and then at 45 to 47 Melville Street. And within 4 years employed 15 people. He was in partnership with Thomas Normoyle. He did work on local steamers, stocked appliances for taking X-ray photographs. And he was agent for the Brush Electrical Engineering Company. The firm did most of the things electrical and had a good reputation in Hobart. And people knew that if you went there, you got what you wanted. Cecil reports that Russell was doing well in his business, but I suspect it was Thomas Normoyle who did most of the work. I can't prove it. But in 1899, Russell is full. He bought a steam launch, and then really it's like a boy with a new toy. He took everybody on the river, and Christmas Day they went on the river in the steam launch, but it wasn't fair. It didn't operate very well, and very often he used to have to go down and prime it and do all sorts of things to it. He'd always wanted something to drive that was steam. Cecil can't understand it, but he says, I suppose more pleasure could be got out of a launch than out of almost anything with such a lovely river and harbour as this. But the expense has always stood in the way. but fate intervened. In May 1900, Cecil reports that Russell has injured his heart. I read somewhere, but I can't find the reference now, that he was lifting an engine at the time, which would tend to do some damage. From then on, he had to take care. He had ill health, bit like Gordon. The doctor ordered 6 months' rest, perhaps a sea voyage. Russell enthusiastically got on a Norwegian sailing ship as the only passenger and was off to South Africa. Now, what Kate said about South Africa in 1900 is quite an odd destination to get well. Cecil reported that Norm Moyle was in charge at Melville Street and the business was doing well. He was, from that time on, that's 1900, he was told to undertake no exertion and took regular long holidays away from his business. That would seem perfect, yes. But there was one project that Russell initiated in 1908 that involved the rest of the family. Russell wanted to establish a timber mill in the Wheelanger Forest and asked his family to contribute to the venture. So they all put money in it. The mill was to be built at Reeven Beach, but needed supplies to be brought in. So Russell built a railway track. Social occasion, I forgot to show you. You'll notice that the men look all the same. Okay. Russell was very friendly with Lewis Dobson, one of the chief Hobart families. And that's Lewis, and I think this is a photo of Leslie Farm, which I think was a Dobson property, I'm not sure. Yeah. That's Lewis and his wife. That's somebody called Miss Bilstead. And there is famous Tom Steele. And Miss Charlotte. Sorry. And Russell. So it's a very close photo for him. Man didn't manage to get away. And this is Mary Marguerite, and that's a very interesting photo of her. I didn't realise she was so small.
It's collapsed on the husband.
I reckon it's about 1900. And the men look all the same, with high fashion and with those dreadful hats. But that is probably the second best photo of him. He still doesn't look comfortable. Wheelanger. I said that he was often taken standing in front of a tree. And that's obviously, the tree probably didn't last, but he's still got the hat on. He needed to track with a locomotive. So he built a track and he built a locomotive. It's known as the coffee pot locomotive. And it went up and down that spindly track. Spindly track. Yes. Absolutely terrifying. Because they built the mill at Reeven Beach. So there was a lot of material to take down from Wheelanger. There's Reeven Beach, the little coffee pot locomotive. He built it in his workshop. So he had good ideas, but they didn't necessarily all come off because the venture failed. In about 1911, he declared himself bankrupt and he was left in debt, which Cecil and other family members, had to pay off. He kept going overseas, and he was sailing to Fiji. He got ill in on the boat, and on January 1914, He died of a heart attack in the Colonial Hospital, Suva, Fiji, where he got ill on the ship. Dad, he was very young, and he was deeply in debt at the time of his death. And his estate was not finalised for years. Lily keeps going through, she went through the World War One, and there was huge inflation, and I don't know how she lived, but she kept writing to Cecil, saying, obviously asking for money, and he used to send some money. He always came to her assistance, but his Russell's estate was not finalised for years. Once he paid off his debt, he left his money to Everett and Lily and his business partner, Thomas Normoyle. And in 1928, this same Thomas Normoyle set up a university prize, the James Russell Allport Memorial Prize, given to the best overall results in year 3 and the best overall results in year 4. It's still going. It's still on the website of the university. But if you want to talk to the university and get some information, you haven't got a hope. And she finally rang me up yesterday. And I've been waiting for 6 months. It was established in 1928, and the prizes are worth about $100 each. Now, it's not a lot these days, but they want to keep the prize going, so they've got to bring it. I don't know what it started at. I suggest we have to add the title of this talk, question marks, at the end, on something. I've said that Cecil is the one where we get our information. And he did consider them strays, even though he was very complimentary to Russell. Russell wasn't terribly successful. His business did well, and his partner was a good partner. But I reckon Cecil was against them because they both refused to practice law. And Cecil was so devoted. They broke from the family tradition. They went off and did something else. Gordon did half, but he did not practice as a lawyer. And finally found his own niche as a doctor. He was a Justice of the Peace on Flinders Island for a very long time. So he's sort of half and half. Hence the question mark. And Russell refused to even think of becoming a lawyer, right from the start. And I've added in here, he wanted to have a good time. Cecil had a sense of the alienation from the rest of the family. And it's reflected in his letters. But these three in the middle, Gordon, Lily, and Russell, seemed to form a faction. So there was a little faction within the family. They formed a close group, sometimes reinforced by elder sister Minnie, who was willing to give advice at any time, and husband Tom, who was a really good guy. The closeness lasted while they were separated. They were very often separated. But more importantly, they provided valuable moral and financial support for Lily. Lily could be considered a waif, as she had to fight to be an artist. She lived on a pittance, and I must admit, Cecil took pity on her. But I've come to the conclusion that these two, Gordon and Russell, who I first thought were waifs and strays, and that's why I suggested to the FOTA committee, because, you know, but I reckon Cecil fits the title better, all because of the Mrs. Fawns. He didn't stray, he was devoted, but I've decided he's definitely a waif. Thank you very much for listening. This will be my last talk. Because my voice goes, and anyway, new breed of talkers. I'm sorry I went over time.
No, pleasure. Thank you, Marian, very much. Thank you all for coming. If you haven't already, please have a look through the museum. Caitlin and her team have done a magnificent job of getting it up while we were closed. It looks fantastic. So if you do have a minute, please walk through. Does anybody have any questions for either myself or Marian? No, you all look like you're ready to go.
Sorry.
Hopefully that was an interesting talk for you. I'm very sad to hear that it's Marian's last one. I'm going to try and convince her to do some more. We'll see how that goes, because she is a font of knowledge and we are very grateful to have her. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.